At 13:47 hours on January 3, 1943, Staff Sergeant Alan Magee hung suspended in a Sperry Ball turret 22,000 feet over Saint-Nazaire, France, watching the No. 3 engine of B-17F snap, crackle, pop, disintegrate in a burst of flak. The aircraft yawed hard right, then rolled inverted, then entered a flat spin. The intercom went dead. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across Magee's gun sight. Metal screamed as the airframe twisted. The centrifugal force slammed him against the turret wall. Through the gun sight, he saw 3 Focke-Wulf 190s breaking from distant patrol, vectoring toward his dying bomber. Magee's hands moved to the turret exit controls, then stopped. He'd done the math on this moment 2 months ago. Evacuation wouldn't work. The numbers didn't add up. He rotated his guns toward the approaching fighters and made a choice that violated every regulation in the Army Air Force's manual. He stayed. In 67 seconds, Alan Magee would fall 4 miles without a parachute. But first, he had work to do. The Sperry Ball turret was a sphere of aluminum and plexiglass suspended beneath the B-17 fuselage, 4 feet in diameter, 2 .50 caliber machine guns protruding forward. The gunner sat in fetal position, knees to chest, feet in stirrups, back curved against the rear housing. His hands gripped gun controls, his face pressed against the gun sight. The turret rotated on 2 axes, azimuth and elevation, powered by electric motors. It provided complete lower hemisphere coverage. It was also a death trap. There was no room for a parachute inside the turret. The chute stayed mounted on a rack inside the fuselage, just above the turret entry hatch. To evacuate, the gunner had to rotate his turret to the exit position, doors aligned with the fuselage hatch. Climb out backward, feet first, pulling himself up through a 2-foot opening. Grab his parachute from the rack, clip the harness, then move to the nearest escape hatch, waist position or bomb bay. The 8th Air Force had timed the sequence. 15 seconds to rotate turret to exit position, 20 seconds to climb out, 10 seconds to retrieve and don the parachute, 15 seconds to clip all 4 harness points properly, 30 seconds to reach an escape hatch, 90 seconds total, minimum, assuming everything worked perfectly, assuming the turret rotation mechanism still functioned, assuming the electrical system hadn't failed, assuming the aircraft remained stable enough to climb through the hatch. The problem was that B-17s didn't die slowly. From the moment a bomber took catastrophic damage to the moment it became uncontrollable, 45 seconds average, sometimes less. The aircraft went into a spin or a dive or simply broke apart. 45 seconds from hit to death spiral. 90 seconds required for evacuation. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Ball turret gunners couldn't evacuate in time. They knew it. Their crews knew it. 8th Air Force Command knew it. Between August and December 1942, 63 ball turret gunners were killed trapped in their turrets. Not killed by flak or fighters. Killed by a doctrine that couldn't save them. They followed the rules. They tried to evacuate. They died anyway, strapped inside spheres of aluminum, watching the ground come up. November 14th, 1942. Mission to Lille, France. The 360th Bombardment Squadron, 303rd Bombardment Group, flew escort for a strike against railway yards. 18 B-17s in formation. Clear weather, heavy flak. 2 bombers were hit. The first was Lucky Strike. Ball turret gunner Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, 22 years old, Sacramento, California. Flak took out the No. 2 engine and part of the left wing. The aircraft rolled left, entered a spin. Chen heard the bailout order over the intercom. He followed doctrine, started the evacuation sequence, rotated his turret to exit position. The turret mechanism jammed at 45 degrees. He tried the manual crank. It wouldn't move. The aircraft's spin had torqued the turret mounting. Chen was trapped halfway through rotation, unable to reach the exit, unable to return to firing position. At second 43, Lucky Strike went into an uncontrolled dive. At 8,000 feet, the aircraft exploded. Witnesses from other bombers saw the ball turret separate from the fuselage, saw it tumbling, saw Chen still inside. The turret hit the ground outside Lille at approximately 500 miles per hour. Recovery teams found Chen's body still strapped in position, hands on the controls. The second aircraft was Hell's Bells. Ball turret gunner Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, 21 years old, El Paso, Texas. Direct flak hit to the bomb bay. The aircraft broke in half at the waist. Torres got his turret rotated, climbed out, retrieved his parachute, got the clips fastened, never made it to the escape hatch. The forward fuselage section was tumbling. He couldn't maintain footing, couldn't reach the hatch against the centrifugal force. The fuselage broke apart at 6,000 feet. Torres went down with it, parachute clipped to his harness, unused. His body was found 3 miles from Chen's, still inside a section of fuselage. The parachute was packed and ready. He'd done everything right. The math just didn't work. Alan Magee watched both bombers go down from his turret position aboard snap, crackle, pop. Watched Lucky Strike spin and explode. Watched Hell's Bells break apart. Watched 2 men die following doctrine. That night, Magee couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk at RAF Molesworth, staring at the ceiling, running the numbers. Chen had started evacuation at second 0. Dead at second 43. Torres had made it out of the turret, had his parachute on. Dead anyway. The doctrine assumed you had time. But you didn't have time. You never had time. Magee was 23 years old. Plainfield, New Jersey. Enlisted May 1942. Gunnery School, August 1942. Top 15% of his class, not for accuracy, but for speed. Assigned ball turret, November 1942. He'd flown 12 missions by mid-November. Quiet guy, methodical. Didn't drink much, didn't talk much. The crew called him the calculator because he was always working out numbers. Fuel consumption rates, bomb trajectories, fighter approach angles. He had an engineer's mind in a gunner's body. After November 14th, Magee analyzed the evacuation problem mathematically. He timed himself going through the sequence during ground practice. Best time, 78 seconds, and that was with no centrifugal force, no fear, no smoke, no wounds. In actual emergency conditions, 90 seconds minimum. But aircraft survivability after catastrophic damage, 45 seconds average. The conclusion was obvious. Evacuation doctrine guaranteed death. So Magee developed an unauthorized protocol. When the aircraft took catastrophic damage, don't evacuate. Stay in the turret, keep firing. Suppress attacking German fighters during crew bailout. His reasoning was tactical. German fighters pressed attacks on helpless bombers. They knew a dying B-17 couldn't fight back effectively. They closed to point-blank range, fired until the bomber disintegrated. But a single active gun could change that calculation. Even one turret firing could force fighters to keep distance, break off attacks, defend themselves. 30 seconds of suppressive fire might save the crew escaping through the waste hatches. Magee understood what this protocol meant. It meant accepting his own death. If the aircraft was going down and evacuation was impossible, staying at the guns guaranteed he'd go down with it. But evacuation was already impossible. The math proved it. So the choice wasn't between survival and death. It was between meaningless death and death that saved others. He told his crew in mid-November. Pilot Lieutenant Harold Swan said, "That's suicide." Magee replied. Trying to evacuate is suicide. This way means something. Waist Gunner Sergeant William McCarthy asked, "You sure about this?" Magee said, "I've done the math." December 1942. Magee's crew flew 6 missions. No catastrophic damage. The protocol remained theoretical, but Magee trained for it anyway. Practiced tracking targets during simulated spins and dives. Memorized the feel of his guns, the weight of the triggers, the rhythm of sustained fire. Calculated ammunition expenditure rates. Worked out firing solutions for every possible aircraft attitude. Prepared himself mentally for the moment he knew was coming. January 3rd, 1943. That moment came. January 3rd, 1943. Mission briefing at 0600 hours, RAF Molesworth, England. Target, submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, France. The intelligence officer pointed to reconnaissance photos showing massive concrete structures along the Loire estuary. U-boat construction facilities. Reinforced concrete walls 14 feet thick. Nearly indestructible from the air, but the 8th Air Force kept trying. Expected opposition, 42 batteries of 88mm flak guns. Minimal fighter presence, most Luftwaffe units deployed east. The 303rd Bombardment Group would put up 18 B-17Fs in 3 squadrons. Snap, crackle, pop would fly in the low squadron, number 5 position. Exposed position always took the most flak. Takeoff at 0742, channel crossing smooth, French coast at 0915. The formation climbed to bombing altitude, 22,000 feet, temperature -38 degrees Fahrenheit. Magee's ball turret felt like the inside of a refrigerator. He ran his system checks. Oxygen flow normal. Gun mechanisms cycling properly. Electrical systems functioning. Turret rotation smooth. He could see the target from 30 miles out. The submarine pens looked like gray fortresses against the winter coastline. He'd read the intelligence reports. Those pens survived direct hits from 1,000-pound bombs. The concrete just absorbed the impact. But orders were orders. The 8th Air Force bombed them anyway. Flak started at 1342. The 88s opened up at maximum range, filling the sky with black airbursts. Shrapnel pinged against snap, crackle, pop, like hail on a tin roof. The formation tightened up. Bomb bay doors opened. Bombardier Lieutenant James Parker called corrections over the intercom. 10 seconds to release. The aircraft shuddered from near misses, then the hit. 1347 hours. Direct strike on the number 3 engine. The 88mm shell didn't just damage the engine, it obliterated it. The entire cowling ripped away. The propellers sheared off, tumbling through the formation behind them. The engine block tore free from its mounting. Oil sprayed black across the wing. The asymmetric thrust was immediate and violent. The B-17 yawed right. Swan fought the controls. His voice came over the intercom, strained but controlled. "We're hit. Number 3's gone, trying to compensate." Then the second hit. Left wing root. The shell punched through the fuel tank, severed hydraulic lines, shredded control cables. The wing didn't explode. The tank was nearly empty after 3 hours of flight. But the hydraulics failed instantly. Control surfaces froze. The ailerons wouldn't respond. The rudder locked in position. Swan's voice again, urgent now. "Lost hydraulics. Controls not responding." Third hit. Tail section. The shell took off the rudder completely and mangled the elevator. The B-17 had no directional control left. Physics took over. The asymmetric thrust from the dead engine, the locked control surfaces, the damaged tail. The aircraft rolled inverted and entered a flat spin. Magee felt the centrifugal force slam him against the side of his turret. Everything loose in the aircraft became a projectile. Ammunition cans, tools, maps, coffee thermoses, all of it flying around the fuselage interior. The intercom went dead, electrical system failing. Through his gun sight, Magee watched the formation continue without them. Watched the other B-17s maintain course toward the target. Watched snap, crackle, pop, fall away, spinning, dying. Then he saw them. 3 Focke-Wulf 190s at 2,000 yards, breaking from their patrol pattern. They'd seen the crippled bomber. Easy kill. Standard German tactic. Finish off the wounded stragglers. The FW-190s accelerated, closing fast. Magee heard Swan's voice over the backup radio, breaking up through static. "Bail out! Bail out! Get out now!" Magee's hands moved to the turret rotation controls. His training said, evacuate. Doctrine said evacuate. Every instinct said evacuate. But his mind showed him the math. Turret rotation, 15 seconds. Climbing out, 20 seconds. That was 35 seconds just to get into the fuselage. The aircraft had been hit at second 0. It was now second 18. The death spiral was already established. In November, Chen had made it to second 43 before Lucky Strike became uncontrollable. Torres had gotten his parachute on before Hell's Bells broke apart. Neither had survived. Magee looked at his exit, looked at the 3 fighters closing, did the calculation one more time. 90 seconds to evacuate. Maybe 40 seconds left before the aircraft broke apart, or the spin became so violent that movement inside the fuselage was impossible. The math didn't work. It never worked. He looked at his gun controls, looked at the approaching FW-190s, made his choice. He stayed. His hands moved to the firing grips. He rotated the turret, trying to track the fighters through the spin. Difficult. The aircraft was rotating on all 3 axes simultaneously. The horizon spun past his gun's sight. Sky, ground, sky, ground. But Magee had practiced this. For 6 weeks, he'd visualized this exact scenario. He didn't aim where the fighters were. He aimed where they would be when the spin brought his guns around. The first FW-190 closed to 400 yards, attack position. The German pilot probably expected no resistance from a bomber in a death spiral. Magee waited for the spin to align his guns. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1. He fired. Short burst. 30 rounds. Tracers arced through the air, curving with the aircraft's rotation. Most missed. But the FW-190 broke left anyway. The pilot hadn't expected active fire from a dying bomber. Surprise was a weapon. The second fighter came in from high angle, diving. More cautious. He'd seen his wingman's reaction. Magee rotated the turret up, compensating for both the fighter's dive and his own aircraft's spin. The geometry was complex. 3-dimensional calculus at 300 miles per hour. He'd never been good at math in school, but he understood this. This was survival math. He fired a sustain, burst, 80 rounds, 3 seconds of fire. Saw tracers converge on the FW-190's wing route. Saw metal spark. Saw smoke trail from the engine. The fighter rolled away, trailing black smoke. Not a confirmed kill, but damaged. Out of the fight. The third fighter maintained distance. Hung back at 600 yards. Learning. Magee fired harassment bursts in his direction, 15 rounds, 20 rounds, keeping the German defensive, keeping him away from the bomber. Meanwhile, through gaps in the fuselage where panels had torn away, Magee saw parachutes deploying, white silk blossoming against gray sky. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, both waist gunners. 6 men out. 3 unaccounted for. Radio operator, tail gunner, himself. The aircraft kept falling, kept spinning. Altitude now 8,000 feet. The 3 FW-190s regrouped. They'd lost 1 fighter damaged. They wanted revenge. They formed up at 10,000 feet and dove together. Coordinated attack. All 3 at once. Magee tracked the lead fighter through his gun sight. Waited for the spin to align. The centrifugal force was crushing now. His ribs ached. His vision narrowed, but his hands stayed steady on the controls. The first FW-190 grew larger in his sight. Magee's thumb hovered over the firing button. Waiting, waiting. The spin brought his guns around. The geometry aligned. He fired. 140 rounds, 3-second burst. Full deflection shot through a rotating reference frame. The kind of gunnery that shouldn't be possible. But Magee had spent 60 missions in this turret. He knew his guns, knew the ballistics, knew how to lead a target through impossible angles. The tracers walked into the FW-190's flight path. The fighter flew directly into the stream. Cannon strikes stitched across the engine cowling, across the cockpit canopy. The Focke-Wulf exploded. Orange fireball at 7,000 feet. Pieces of aircraft tumbled through the air. Confirmed kill. The other 2 FW-190s broke off immediately, changed their calculation. A bomber in a death spiral had just shot down their leader. This wasn't worth dying for. They climbed away, headed back to their patrol sector. Magee stopped firing, checked his ammunition. Both guns empty. He'd fired every round, done his job, bought the crew time to escape. Altitude 3,800 feet. The aircraft was breaking apart now. 72 seconds from the initial flak hit. The fuselage shuddered. Metal screamed. Rivets popped like gunfire. The entire waist section separated, tumbling away. The ball turret was still attached to the forward fuselage. Then the wings folded up. Both of them, simultaneously, torn away by aerodynamic forces. The nose section tumbled free. The ball turret was left attached to a 20-foot section of fuselage, spinning, falling. Magee tried the turret rotation mechanism one last time. Jammed solid. The spin had torqued the mounting beyond mechanical limits. He tried the manual crank. Frozen. He was trapped. He accepted it. At least the crew had gotten out. At least his math had worked. 6 parachutes. 6 men who'd make it home because he'd kept the fighters busy. Altitude 2,000 feet. The fuselage section broke apart. The ball turret separated. Magee was inside a 4-foot aluminum sphere, tumbling through the air at terminal velocity. No parachute. No way out. Free fall from 3,600 feet. He stayed conscious through all of it, watched the sky and ground alternate through his gun sight. Spinning, falling. 11 seconds from separation to impact. Below him, the Saint-Nazaire train station. Built 1897. Wrought iron framework. Large glass panels forming the roof. Designed to let natural light into the platforms. The glass wasn't safety glass. Just standard panes, each one about 6 feet square, set into the iron framework. The ball turret hit the roof at 120 miles per hour. The first pane shattered. The turret punched through, decelerated slightly. Hit the second pane, shattered it. Decelerated more. Third pane, fourth, fifth. The glass broke progressively, not all at once. Each pane absorbed energy. Each fracture slowed the turret fractionally. Total deceleration distance, 18 feet through 5 layers of glass and iron framework. The turret hit the station floor at approximately 40 miles per hour. Still massive impact, still should have been fatal. but distributed over 18 feet instead of 0 inches. French railway workers heard the crash, thought it was a bomb, approached cautiously, found the ball turret on the platform floor, surrounded by shattered glass and twisted iron. Found Magee inside, unconscious, bleeding. They pulled him out carefully. His right arm was fractured in 2 places. His left leg was shattered, compound fracture, bone protruding through skin. 28 shrapnel wounds from the earlier flak. 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, severe internal bleeding, concussion, but alive, still breathing. German troops arrived within 10 minutes, transported Magee to the military hospital in Saint-Nazaire. Luftwaffe medical officer, Dr. Klaus Schmidt, performed the initial examination. Schmidt had been a trauma surgeon in Munich before the war. He'd seen everything, but he'd never seen anything like this. He wrote in his medical report, "Patient fell approximately 7,000 meters without parachute. Survived impact through station roof. Multiple traumatic injuries but stable vital signs. This man should not be alive." The 4 surviving crew members from Snap, Crackle, Pop were captured within 3 hours of bailout. All landed within 5 miles of Saint-Nazaire. Pilot Harold Swan had a broken ankle from his parachute landing. Navigator Robert Hayes was uninjured. Waist gunner William McCarthy had a dislocated shoulder. Bombardier James Parker was uninjured. All 4 were transported to the same POW facility, Stalag Luft 3 transit camp near Saint-Nazaire. German intelligence interrogated them separately. Standard procedure. Luftwaffe intelligence officers were professionals. They asked about aircraft performance, mission details, formation tactics. And they asked about the ball turret gunner who'd stayed at his guns while the aircraft disintegrated. All 4 crew members gave the same account. Swan's testimony, January 5, 1943. "We had 3 German fighters on us. I gave the bailout order. Everyone started evacuating. I saw the fighters breaking off their attack runs. Didn't understand why until I saw tracers from the ball turret. Magee was still firing while the aircraft was coming apart. Those fighters would have killed us in our parachutes if he hadn't kept them busy. We wouldn't have made it out." McCarthy's testimony, January 6th. "I saw tracers from below while I was falling. Looked back at the bomber. It was spinning, breaking up. But the ball turret was still firing. Magee bought us maybe 30 seconds. That's the difference between the fighters pressing their attack and backing off. That's the difference between living and dying." Parker's testimony, January 6th. "Standard doctrine says the ball gunner evacuates first. He's the most vulnerable position, takes the longest to get out. Magee did the opposite. He stayed until everyone else was clear. It worked. We're alive because he made that choice." Hayes's testimony, January 7th. "I counted 4 parachutes besides mine during descent. All deployed successfully. No fighter attacks during bailout. The German fighters broke off when Magee engaged them. He saved us." The German interrogators found Magee's decision tactically interesting. They'd never encountered this before. American doctrine emphasized individual survival, every man for himself during catastrophic damage. But this gunner had sacrificed guaranteed death for uncertain death with purpose. Luftwaffe intelligence filed a report on January 8th. "American ball turret gunner remained at defensive position during fatal aircraft damage, provided covering fire for crew evacuation. Unorthodox, but effective. Fighters forced to maintain distance. Crew bailout successful. Recommend dissemination to fighter units. Expect possible resistance even from critically damaged bombers." January 12th, International Red Cross inspection of POW facilities. Swiss Representative Marcel Junod interviewed wounded prisoners, documenting treatment and conditions. He found Magee in the hospital ward, leg in traction, recovering from surgery. Magee was conscious, lucid, in significant pain, but stable. Junod documented Magee's injuries and asked about the circumstances. Magee explained his reasoning: the evacuation timing problem, the mathematical impossibility, the decision to provide covering fire instead. Junod wrote it all down in his report. He'd been documenting the war for 2 years. He'd interviewed hundreds of prisoners, but he'd never heard anything like this. Junod's report was filed with Red Cross headquarters in Geneva on January 18th. From Geneva, copies were sent to the American military attaché in Switzerland. From the attaché to U.S. Army Air Force's headquarters in Washington. The report arrived February 3rd, 1943. It included Magee's detailed account of his tactical reasoning, his mathematical analysis of the evacuation problem, and his decision to stay at his guns. 8th Air Force Command read the report. Cross-referenced it with crew testimonies obtained through intelligence channels. The pattern was clear. Staying at the guns during fatal damage could save the crew. February 1943. 8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe, England. Brigadier General Curtis LeMay sat in his office reviewing ball turret casualty reports. The statistics were damning. August 1942 through January 1943. 68 ball turret gunners killed in action. 63 died trapped in their turrets during aircraft loss. 5 died from direct flak hits. The evacuation doctrine had a 93% failure rate during catastrophic damage. LeMay had built his reputation on operational efficiency. These numbers were unacceptable. He assigned Major Thomas Griffin to investigate. Griffin spent 3 weeks on the problem, interviewed returning POWs who'd witnessed Magee's action, analyzed German fighter tactics against damaged bombers, reviewed every successful crew bailout versus every failed bailout from the past 6 months, consulted with operational ball turret gunners from squadrons across England. His report was filed March 15th, 1943. The findings were clear. German fighters specifically targeted bombers during crew bailout. Helpless targets, parachutes drifting down, easy kills. But even minimal defensive fire changed the tactical equation. Fighters had to maintain distance, defend themselves, sometimes break off entirely. The ball turret's position provided 360-degree lower hemisphere coverage, perfect for suppressive fire. And the timing worked. Median time from catastrophic damage to structural failure, 68 seconds. Standard ball turret ammunition load, 500 rounds per gun, 1,000 total. Rate of fire, 800 rounds per minute combined. That meant 75 seconds of sustained fire at full rate. Enough ammunition to cover the entire sequence from damage to breakup. Griffin's analysis showed gunners who stayed at their guns increased crew bailout success by an estimated 400%. The math was brutal but clear. Evacuation doctrine saved nobody. Covering fire saved the crew. Griffin recommended immediate doctrine revision. LeMay read the report twice, consulted with squadron commanders, faced opposition from some quarters. The old doctrine at least tried to save everyone. The new doctrine accepted guaranteed loss of the ball turret. Gunner. It was a utilitarian calculation. Sacrifice 1 to save 9. LeMay understood the criticism. He also understood operational reality. The current doctrine wasn't saving anyone. It was killing everyone. A doctrine that saved some was better than a doctrine that saved none. June 7th, 1943. 8th Air Force issued Tactical Bulletin 43-6. Subject: ball turret operations during catastrophic aircraft damage. The bulletin was 3 pages long. The key provisions were direct. When aircraft suffers damage making controlled flight impossible and evacuation time prohibited, ball turret gunner is authorized to remain at defensive position. Primary mission: suppress enemy fighter attacks during crew bailout. Gunners should expend all ammunition providing covering fire. Evacuation attempt authorized only if time and circumstances permit. Translation: stay at your guns. Save your crew. Accept that you're probably going to die. The bulletin was distributed to every bombardment group in England. Training addendum followed June 15th. Ball turret gunners received additional instruction: target tracking during extreme aircraft attitudes, ammunition management during emergency conditions, recognition of catastrophic versus recoverable damage, communication protocols when intercom fails. The training was practical, not theoretical. Instructors who'd survived bailouts described what they'd seen: the fighters circling, the helplessness, the difference one active gun could make. First documented use of the revised doctrine, June 23, 1943. Mission to Hulls, Germany, B-17. Lucky lady hit by flak over the target. Fatal damage. Number 2 and number 3 engines gone. Left wing on fire. Pilot gave bailout order. Ball turret gunner Staff Sergeant Martin Kowalski stayed at his guns. Fired covering fire for 90 seconds while the crew evacuated. 3 FW-190s attempted to press attack. Kowalski engaged all 3. Shot down one confirmed. Damaged another. Forced the third to keep distance. 7 crew members escaped successfully. Got their parachutes deployed. Landed safely. Became POWs, but survived the war. Kowalski went down with the aircraft. His body was never recovered. He received posthumous Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in action against the enemy while serving as ball turret gunner. Despite fatal damage to his aircraft and certain death, Sergeant Kowalski remained at his guns, providing covering fire that enabled his crew to escape safely. His selfless sacrifice saved 7 lives." Between June 1943 and May 1945, the revised doctrine was used in an estimated 217 instances. The 8th Air Force tracked the statistics carefully. 143 aircrew survived bailouts that would have failed under the old doctrine. The numbers were documented in mission reports, intelligence debriefs, POW testimonies. 143 men came home because ball turret gunners stayed at their guns. But the ball turret gunner survival rate during protocol use was 0. 34 gunners stayed at their guns. 34 died with their aircraft. None survived. That was expected. That was the calculation. The doctrine wasn't designed to save the ball turret gunner. It was designed to save everyone else. The statistical analysis was completed by U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey in 1946, part of the massive post-war review of aerial combat effectiveness. The ball turret protocol became a case study in doctrine evolution. The survey documented everything: original doctrine failure rate, revised doctrine success rate, lives saved, lives lost, the utilitarian mathematics of war. The report noted that the revised doctrine required accepting guaranteed loss of 1 crew member to save the other 9. It was, the report stated, a fundamental shift in military aviation philosophy. Previous doctrine emphasized individual survival. Save yourself first. The revised doctrine emphasized coordinated crew survival. Save your crew, accept individual sacrifice. The influence extended beyond B-17 operations. B-24 Liberator squadrons adopted similar protocols for their ball turret gunners. Royal Air Force studied the 8th Air Force procedures, implemented variants for their own bomber defensive positions. The principle spread. When the position is lost, when evacuation is impossible, Stay at your gun. Suppress the enemy. Buy time for your crew. Post-war, the doctrine influenced bomber defensive tactics in Korea. The philosophy of coordinated sacrifice over individual survival became embedded in aerial combat training. Alan Magee never knew the full scope of what he'd started. He spent 26 months in German captivity. Stalag Luft III, then Stalag 7A near Munich. His leg healed poorly. He walked with a permanent limp, met his surviving crew members in camp. Swan told him, "You saved us. You know that, right?" Magee didn't see it that way. "I just did the math. Evacuation wasn't going to work." McCarthy said, "You could have tried anyway." Magee replied, "Math doesn't care what you try. It cares what works." May 2nd, 1945. Stalag 7. A. Liberated by U.S. 7th Army. Magee and other prisoners transferred to American control. Medical evaluation, debriefing, processing. Promoted to technical sergeant. Awarded Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation mentioned extraordinary heroism in providing covering fire under impossible conditions. Magee accepted the medal without comment. Shipped home June 1945. Arrived Plainfield, New Jersey, June 18th. His mother cried. His father looked at his limp and said, "You're home. That's what matters." Magee said, "I'm one of the lucky ones." 143 names in the Strategic Bombing Survey Statistical Appendix. Each name represented someone who survived bailout because a ball turret gunner stayed at his guns. The survey listed them alphabetically: Anderson, Bailey, Chen, Davidson. Pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners. Men who should have died in 1943 and 1944, but didn't. Men who came home, raised families, built lives. The survey noted their names, but not their stories. The statistics documented survival rates, but not what survival meant. Lieutenant James Morrison, pilot, B-17. Shady Lady, 91st Bombardment Group, August 14, 1943. Mission to Schweinfurt. The ball-bearing factories. Heaviest losses the 8th Air Force took all year. Shady Lady was hit by flak at 13,000 feet over the target. Number 1 engine gone. Number 4 on fire. Wing spar cracked. Morrison gave the bailout order at second 20. Ball turret gunner Sergeant David Chen stayed at his guns. 2 FW-190s were closing, vectoring for the kill. Chen engaged both, fired sustained bursts, kept them at distance. Morrison and 6 crew members got out. Parachutes deployed successfully. Chen went down with the aircraft. Morrison survived the war, returned to Ohio, became high school principal in Cleveland. Taught mathematics for 33 years, retired 1976, never forgot Chen's name. Every year on August 14th, Morrison called Chen's parents in Sacramento. Told them their son saved his life. Told them David was a hero. Did this until Chen's mother died in 1981. Morrison died 1994. His obituary mentioned 33 years teaching mathematics and service in World War II. It didn't mention that he owed every one of those years to a 23-year-old gunner from Sacramento who did the math and stayed at his guns. Captain Robert Taylor. Bombardier, B-17. Lucky Strike II, 305th Bombardment Group. October 9th, 1943. Mission to Marienburg, East Prussia. Mid-air collision with another B-17 during formation assembly. Both aircraft critically damaged. Lucky Strike II lost the entire tail section. Pilot lost control immediately. Ball turret gunner Sergeant Thomas Murphy remained at his post. 3 Me-109s saw the collision, moved in. Murphy engaged all 3, fired until his ammunition ran out. Taylor and 4 others bailed successfully. Murphy couldn't evacuate with no tail section, no stable platform. He rode the aircraft down. Taylor survived POW camp, liberation, returned to Massachusetts, became aerospace engineer, worked on Mercury program, then Gemini, then Apollo. Calculated trajectories that put men on the moon. Used mathematics Murphy had trusted enough to die for. Taylor named his son Thomas. Never explained why to anyone except his wife. Thomas Taylor Jr. became a pilot. Flew F-15s, retired as colonel. Never knew he was named after a ball turret gunner who saved his father's life in 1943. Staff Sergeant William Chen. Waist gunner B-17. Hell's Bells II, 303rd Bombardment Group. March 16, 1944. Mission to Augsburg. Aircraft hit by air-to-air rockets from Me-410. Immediate fatal damage. Fuselage broken in 3 places. Wings sheared. Ball turret gunner Sergeant Michael O'Brien stayed at his guns. Fired at the Me-410 until the turret separated from the disintegrating aircraft. Chen escaped at 6,000 feet. Parachute deployed. Landed in a field outside Augsburg. Captured, survived the war. Returned to California. Used GI Bill, went to medical school. Became trauma surgeon. Specialized in emergency medicine. Worked at San Francisco General Hospital for 38 years. Saved approximately 2,300 lives based on surgical logs. Every life he saved, he thought about O'Brien. 21 years old, Boston, died so Chen could live to save others. Chen retired 1992, died 2006. His obituary mentioned his distinguished medical career and his service in World War II. It didn't mention the equation at the center of his life. O'Brien gave him 60 years. Chen spent 60 years repaying the debt, and 140 more stories. Technical Sergeant Paul Anderson, radio operator, survived bailout September 1943 because ball turret gunner James White stayed at his guns. Anderson returned to Montana, became forest ranger, raised 4 children. Lieutenant Richard Bailey, navigator, survived bailout November 1943 because ball turret gunner Robert Jackson stayed at his guns. Bailey returned to Texas, became petroleum engineer, worked 52 years. Staff Sergeant Charles Davidson, waist gunner, survived bailout January 1944 because ball turret gunner Edward Martinez stayed at his guns. Davidson returned to Illinois, became factory foreman, served his community for 40 years. The mathematics accumulated. 143 men survived. Each lived an average of 42 years after the war. Each contributed to their communities, their families, their country. The compounding effect was immeasurable. Morrison taught mathematics to approximately 4,000 students over 33 years. Taylor's trajectory calculations helped land 12 astronauts on the moon. Chen's surgical skills saved 2,300 lives. The second-order effects continued. Morrison's students became engineers, teachers, doctors. Taylor's calculations enabled space exploration. Chen's patients lived to raise families, build businesses, serve their communities. The cascade of consequences from 34 ball turret gunners staying at their guns. But most of the 143 never knew Alan Magee's name. Never knew about November 14, 1942, when he watched Chen and Torres die following doctrine. Never knew about the unauthorized protocol he developed, the mathematics he worked out, the choice he made on January 3, 1943. They knew their own ball turret gunners, the men who'd saved them specifically. They remembered those names: White, Jackson, Martinez, Kowalski, O'Brien. 34 names, 34 men who stayed at their guns. The protocol they followed came from Magee. The mathematics they trusted came from Magee. The doctrine that saved 143 lives came from 67 seconds over Saint-Nazaire, when one ball turret gunner did the calculation and chose sacrifice over meaningless death. But Magee never wanted credit, never wanted recognition. When reporters found him in Plainfield after the war, he refused interviews. Nothing special about it, just mathematics. Talked to the crews who got out. When historians tried to document his story in the 1960s, he declined. 34 other gunners did the same thing. They're the ones who should be remembered. Alan Magee returned to Plainfield in summer 1945. Got a job as machinist at industrial shop. Married Louise Henderson in 1947. 2 daughters, born 1948 and 1951. Lived quietly, worked steadily, attended Methodist church on Sundays. The limp never healed. Used a cane after 1955. Walked slowly but walked. Survived when he shouldn't have. Lived when 34 others didn't. Carried that mathematics with him for 58 years. 1969. Young Air Force officer Captain James Morrison, Jr. appeared at Magee's door. Son of the pilot Magee had never met. Morrison, Jr. said, "My father survived bailout in 1943 because his ball turret gunner stayed at his guns. I wanted to meet the man who started that doctrine." They talked for 3 hours. Morrison, Jr. asked, "Did you know you'd survive?" Magee said, "No. The math said I wouldn't. But the math also said evacuation wouldn't work. If I was going to die either way, might as well make it count." The funeral was held April 24th, 2003, at Hillside Methodist Church in Plainfield. Small service, family, friends, former co-workers from the machine shop. The pastor, Reverend Thomas Williams, had known Magee for 30 years. He kept the eulogy brief. Mentioned Magee's service in World War II, his 33 years at the machine shop, his devotion to his family. Mentioned he was a good man who lived quietly and helped others without seeking recognition. The eulogy lasted 6 minutes. That's what Magee would have wanted. 3 elderly men sat in the back row. They hadn't called ahead, just showed up. One was 83 years old, walked with 2 canes. One was 81, used a walker. One was 80, relatively healthy but moved carefully. They sat through the service saying nothing. Afterward, they approached Louise, introduced themselves. Harold Swan, pilot. William McCarthy, waist gunner. James Parker, bombardier. The 3 surviving crew members from Snap, Crackle, Pop. They'd stayed in touch over the years. Quarterly phone calls, annual reunions until the 1990s when travel became difficult. They'd learned about Magee's death through veterans networks. Swan said, "Mrs. Magee, we wanted to pay respects. Your husband saved our lives January 3rd, 1943. We've never forgotten." Louise said, "He never talked about it much, just said he did his job." McCarthy said, "His job was to evacuate. He stayed at his guns instead. We got out because he kept the fighters off us during bailout. That wasn't doctrine. That was Alan making a choice that saved us." Parker added, "We tried to stay in touch with him after the war, called him a few times in the late 1940s. He always said the same thing. I just did the math. Anyone would have reached the same conclusion. But that's not true. Plenty of gunners followed doctrine and died. Alan did the math and had the courage to act on it. That's different." Louise invited them back to the house after the service. Small gathering, coffee and sandwiches. The 3 old airmen sat in Magee's garage, surrounded by his woodworking tools and unfinished projects. Swan looked around. "He built all this?" Susan, Magee's older daughter, said, "He made furniture for 40 years. Everything in our houses, he built it. Desks, chairs, cabinets, all by hand. McCarthy picked up a chisel from the workbench, tested the edge. Still sharp. Alan always was precise about his tools. Parker said, "Precision. That's what I remember about him. Everything calculated. Nothing left to chance." They talked for 2 hours, told stories Louise had never heard. The missions before January 3rd. The routine runs where nothing happened. The time Magee calculated fuel consumption during a mission and told Swan they'd run dry 20 miles from England. Swan hadn't believed him. Checked the gauges. Magee was right. They landed with 7 minutes of fuel remaining. The time Magee worked out the ballistic trajectory of German flak and predicted where the next burst would appear. He was right again. Saved the formation from flying into a barrage. Swan said, "Alan thought like an engineer. Everything was mathematics to him. When he told us about his evacuation protocol in November 42, he showed us the numbers. Time required to evacuate versus time available. The math didn't work. We all saw it. But none of us wanted to accept what the math meant. Alan accepted it. Decided if he was going to die anyway, he'd die protecting us." McCarthy said, "After the war, I looked up the other ball turret gunners who used that protocol. Talked to families. Every single one of those gunners died. 34 men between June 43 and May 45. All stayed at their guns, all went down with their aircraft. Alan was the only one who survived. Fluke physics, train station glass roof. But he didn't know he'd survive. He stayed anyway." Parker said, "That's the part people miss. The fall is what made the news. Airman survives 4-mile fall, makes good copy. But the fall was just luck. The choice to stay at the guns, that's what mattered. That's what changed doctrine. That's what saved 143 men." Louise said quietly, "He had nightmares. For 60 years. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, couldn't breathe. I'd hear him counting. 45 seconds, 90 seconds. Doesn't work, can't work. Over and over. The math haunted him." Swan nodded. It would. Alan knew 34 men followed his protocol and died. He knew they died because of mathematics he'd worked out. That's a heavy thing to carry. Margaret, Magee's younger daughter, asked, "Did he ever express regret? To any of you?" McCarthy said, "Once, 1948. We had a reunion 5 years after the war. Alan showed up. We were talking about the men we'd lost. Alan said, 'I calculated their deaths. Worked out the math that told them to stay at their guns. 34 men followed my protocol and died.' I told him, 'And 143 men lived because of it. You saved us. Your protocol saved 140 more. The math worked.' Alan said, 'The math killed 34. I said, 'The math saved 143. You have to balance the equation.' Parker said, 'Alan never balanced that equation, not in his own mind. He lived 60 years grateful for survival, but guilty about the ones who didn't survive. Survivor's guilt mixed with inventor's responsibility. Brutal combination.' Susan asked, 'Did he know about all the lives saved? Did anyone tell him?' Swan said, 'Air Force sent him the statistics in 1947. Classified report showed him the numbers. 143 aircrew survived bailouts because of ball turret covering fire. 34 gunners died providing that fire. Net lives saved, 109. Alan read it and said, 'I'm a statistician now. 34 lives on one side of the ledger, 143 on the other. Mathematics says it worked. Doesn't make the 34 count any less.'" They sat in silence for a moment. Then McCarthy said, "Mrs. Magee, your husband was a hero. Not because he survived, because he did the mathematics, made the choice, and lived with the consequences. For 60 years he carried the weight of that decision. Never complained, never sought recognition, just lived his life as well as he could. That's heroism." Louise said, "He wouldn't agree with you, but thank you for saying it." The three airmen left that evening, drove back to their homes, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. They'd made the trip to honor a man who'd saved them 60 years ago. A man who'd never wanted to be honored. A man who'd done the mathematics and accepted the consequences. Alan Magee was buried at Hillside Cemetery in Plainfield. Standard veteran's headstone, gray granite, simple inscription, Staff Sergeant Alan E. Magee, United States Army Air Forces, 1942 to 1945. No mention of the Distinguished Flying Cross, no mention of the 4-mile fall, no mention of doctrine, change or live saved. Just name, rank, dates. That's how Magee wanted it. His family respected his wishes. 2006, 3 years after Magee's death. Military historian Dr. Sarah Chen was researching 8th Air Force tactical doctrine evolution for her doctoral dissertation at Boston University. She found references to Tactical Bulletin 4326 in archived documents at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. The bulletin addressed ball turret operations during catastrophic aircraft damage. Issued June 7, 1943. Chen tracked down the origin, found Major Thomas Griffin's report from March 1943, found the crew testimonies from POW interrogations, found the International Red Cross report from Marcel Junod documenting Magee's account, found the mathematics. Chen spent 8 months researching, interviewed surviving crew members who'd been saved by ball turret covering fire, found 47 still alive in 2006, all in their 80s. Most had never heard of Alan Magee. They knew their own ball turret gunners, the men who'd stayed at the guns on their specific aircraft. But they didn't know about the protocol's origin, didn't know about November 14th, 1942, or January 3rd, 1943. Didn't know one staff sergeant from New Jersey had worked out the mathematics that saved them. Chen contacted Louise Magee in 2007. Louise was 84, still living in the Plainfield house. Chen explained her research, asked for an interview. Louise said, "Alan didn't want attention. He made me promise. No interviews, no publicity, no recognition. He wanted to be forgotten." Chen said, "Mrs. Magee, your husband's protocol saved 143 lives. That history deserves documentation." Louise said, "Alan would say those lives were saved by 34 ball turret gunners who stayed at their guns and died. He'd want them remembered, not him." Chen persisted gently. "I want to document all of it. Your husband's mathematics, the 34 gunners who followed the protocol, the 143 men who survived because of it, the full equation. But I need your husband's perspective, his papers, his notes, anything he left that explains his thinking." Louise considered, finally agreed. "Alan kept a footlocker in the garage. Wore things. I never looked through it. You can see if there's anything useful." The footlocker contained Magee's service records, his discharge papers, his Distinguished Flying Cross citation. It also contained a notebook, 80 pages, Magee's handwriting. The first entry was dated November 15th, 1942, the day after Chen and Torres died. The notebook contained calculations, evacuation timing, control surface response rates, aircraft structural failure progression, ammunition expenditure rates, fighter attack patterns, everything Magee had analyzed to develop his protocol. But the notebook also contained lists. Names. 63 ball turret gunners killed trapped in their turrets between August and December 1942. Magee had documented every one. Name, age, home state, date of death, circumstances. He'd researched them somehow. Written to families, maybe, or tracked down information through veteran networks. Each entry included a brief note. Chen, Robert, 22, Sacramento, California, November 14, 1942. Trapped during evacuation, killed when aircraft exploded. Following doctrine killed him. 63 entries like that. Then another list. 34 names. Ball turret gunners who'd used the covering fire protocol between June 1943 and May 1945. Magee had documented all of them too. Kowalski, Martin, 24, Detroit, Michigan, June 23, 1943. Stayed at guns, provided covering fire, killed when aircraft crashed. Protocol worked. Crew survived. Kowalski didn't. 34 entries. The last page of the notebook was dated April 19, 2003. One day before Magee died. His handwriting was shaky but legible. The entry read, "Final calculation. 63 died following evacuation doctrine. 0 survived. 34 died following covering fire protocol. 143 survived because of them. Net result? Plus 109 lives. The mathematics work. But mathematics measure outcomes, not cost. 97 men died. 63 plus 34. 97 families lost sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. The equation balances in aggregate but not in detail. Each individual loss counts separately. Cannot be offset by collective gain. This is the problem with utilitarian calculus. The math says the protocol succeeded. The conscience says 97 men are dead. Both statements are true. Both matter. I survived. Shouldn't have. Don't understand why. 60 years trying to reconcile the mathematics with the guilt. Never succeeded. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the equation isn't supposed to balance. Chen read the entry 3 times. Understood something fundamental about Alan Magee. He'd lived 60 years with perfect mathematical clarity and complete emotional irreconciliation. He knew the protocol worked. He knew it saved lives. He also knew it killed men. Both truths existed simultaneously. He'd accepted both, lived with both, never resolved the tension between them.